I want you to recall the last time you walked out of a movie theater after seeing something truly intense. Maybe it was a hyperviolent war film or a documentary that laid bare a devastating social injustice. Your heart was likely still thumping against your ribs. Your jaw was tight. If a friend turned to you in the lobby and asked how you felt, you'd probably say, "That was deep. That was incredibly profound." You felt in that moment like you had just been fundamentally changed by what you witnessed. But then imagine that same friend asks you a follow-up. What did you actually learn? What do you now understand about the world or about human nature that you didn't understand 2 hours ago? Suddenly, you're grasping at air. You have a massive amount of feeling, but almost no signal. You have total emotional intensity, but zero cognitive clarity. What you actually have in that moment is a body that has been fully mobilized and a mind that has been temporarily narrowed. Your pulse is elevated. Your breathing is shallow. Your attention is still locked onto the emotional afterimage of what you saw. The system hasn't returned to a state where integration is even possible yet. This is the great deception of our modern age. We live in a culture that has effectively rigged our internal wiring to believe that if something is loud, if it's shocking, or if it makes us weep, it must be true. We have conflated the adrenaline of an emotional threat with the quiet, slow labor of actual understanding. And because we can no longer tell the difference between being activated and being informed, we're becoming a society of people who are incredibly certain, but profoundly confused. Today, I want to pull back the curtain on why your brain often shuts down at the exact moment you think it's opening up. We're going to look at the emotional threat register, how intensity tricks the mind into an illusion of depth, why certainty is often just a sophisticated form of stress management, and how we can find the psychological space to actually start thinking again.
Hello and welcome to The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr, where we explore the mind's influence on life, relationships, and society. RJ Starr is an existential psychologist, professor, and author dedicated to exploring the core challenges of human existence, how we find meaning, embrace responsibility, and navigate life's challenges. Known for a thought-provoking yet accessible approach, RJ inspires listeners to cultivate self-awareness, emotional intelligence, authenticity, and purpose. This podcast is designed for all psychology enthusiasts, practitioners, students, and anyone curious about why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. Each episode unpacks theories, explores complex questions, and offers insights that deepen understanding of the human experience. So settle in, stay curious, and discover the psychology of us.
I want to start with a confession about the way we've been conditioned to perceive the world. We live in a culture that quietly, almost invisibly, teaches us a specific equation. Strong emotion equals depth. We've all bought into it. We've seen it in the way we talk about art, the way we consume news, even the way we judge the sincerity of our friends. If a piece of music moves you to the point of overwhelm, you assume it's meaningful. If a news segment shocks you, you assume it's important. Conversely, we've started to believe that if something leaves us calm, if a speaker is nuanced, if a book is slow, if a conversation is quiet, it must be shallow, or worse, avoidant of the real issues. But as a psychologist, I have to tell you, that equation is a neurological trick. And when I say trick, I don't mean manipulation in a sinister sense. I mean a perfectly predictable shortcut the brain takes under pressure. One that usually keeps us safe, but doesn't always keep us wise. Emotional intensity is very good at telling us something is relevant. It's a flare set up in the dark saying, "Hey, pay attention to this." But it's remarkably bad at telling us that something has been understood. In fact, relevance and understanding are often at odds with one another. The more relevant or threatening something feels, the harder it becomes for the human mind to actually process and integrate it. To understand why this happens, we have to look at what occurs under the hood when we're moved. When your emotional intensity spikes, you see, Your brain doesn't just add feeling on top of your thinking. It actually reorganizes the entire cognitive kitchen. When I say it reorganizes the kitchen, I mean something very literal is happening in the sequence of how information gets processed. Under normal conditions, sensory input flows through pathways that eventually reach the parts of the brain responsible for reflection, planning, and meaning making. But under threat, the brain is designed to shortcut that process. There is a fast track, sometimes described as the low road, where sensory data gets routed toward the amygdala before the higher cortical systems have had a chance to interpret it. The amygdala is not a philosopher. It's not interested in nuance. It's a detection system. It's a smoke alarm. And it's built to be biased toward false positives, because evolution does not reward the creature who calmly waits to confirm whether the rustle in the bushes is actually a predator. If you want a human image for it, picture a security guard who shoots first and asks questions later. That's an uncomfortable metaphor, yeah, but it's accurate in terms of speed and priority. When the security guard decides something's dangerous, the rest of the brain has to respond. The prefrontal cortex, the part that helps you weigh evidence, see multiple perspectives, and slow the impulse to react, it gets functionally sidelined. It's not gone, it's not broken, it's simply outranked. This is why intensity can feel like revelation. The moment the threat system engages, it becomes very hard to hold complexity. It becomes hard to remember what you believed 10 minutes ago, hard to imagine what the other person meant, hard to keep the wider context online. Not because you're weak and not because you lack discipline, but because your biology has temporarily revoked your thinking permit. And this is also why high-intensity media can be so destabilizing without us realizing it. You're not just consuming a story, you're repeatedly triggering a fast threat pathway that was never built for long exposures. You're keeping the security guard on duty for 2 hours straight. You're asking the system to stay alert, stay tight, stay oriented. Then you walk out and expect to discuss meaning as if the mind has been sitting in a seminar the whole time. It hasn't. It's been on patrol. Think about the last time you were in a heated argument, the kind where you can feel the heat in your neck. Did you feel like your mind was expanding? Did you feel like you were suddenly more capable of seeing the other person's perspective? No, of course not. Of course not. Your attention narrowed to a needle point. Your working memory, that's a part of your brain that holds multiple facts in suspension, it shrank to almost nothing. Your tolerance for ambiguity went right out the window. That's why, in those moments, even a small disagreement can feel unbearable. A clarifying question sounds like an attack. A pause feels like rejection. The system simply does not have the bandwidth for complexity. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's an ancient, brilliant, and life-saving adaptation. You see, under threat, your nervous system stops trying to integrate and starts trying to orient. If a tiger is jumping at you, your brain doesn't want to know the history of the species or the socioeconomic factors that led to the tiger being hungry. It just wants to know which way to run. The problem is that in our modern, hyper-mediated world, the tigers are almost always symbolic. They're political posts on a screen, violent imagery in a film, or a perceived slight from a neighbor. Our brains react with the same primitive narrowing of focus, and in that narrow, oxygen-deprived space, certainty becomes incredibly attractive. And this is where we have to talk about the modern environment, because we did not build a culture that protects integration. We built a culture that monetizes activation. Social media platforms, they're not designed to reward nuance. They're designed to reward engagement. And engagement, in practice, is often a polite word for nervous system capture. The algorithm doesn't care whether you've understood something. It cares whether you reacted. It cares whether your finger stopped scrolling. It cares whether your heart rate changed enough to make you comment, share, argue, or return for more. Integration is slow. It's private. It's quiet. It does not produce immediate behavioral output. Activation does. Activation produces clicks. Activation produces certainty. Activation produces loyalty to a side. So the digital architecture favors the threat register, not because anyone sat in a room and said, let's make people anxious, but because the threat register is behaviorally productive. It generates urgency. It generates energy. It generates a feeling that something must be done now. It also generates a feeling of righteousness, which is one of the most intoxicating emotional states available to the human mind. There's a dopamine component to this. The brain rewards us when we feel coherent, when we feel aligned, when we feel certain. That reward is not the same as truth. It's the brain saying thank you for reducing internal conflict. It's relief, it's closure, it's a hit. That is part of why outrage can become addictive. It's not only anger, it's also the pleasure of feeling right, the pleasure of feeling clean and positioned, the pleasure of belonging to an interpretive tribe where complexity is no longer required. And in existential terms, there is something even deeper going on. When people feel overwhelmed, disoriented, or powerless, outrage can offer a substitute for agency. It creates a sense of moral motion. It makes life feel legible again. You may not be able to solve your own loneliness, your own financial stress, your own fatigue, but you can attach your nervous system to a cause and feel alive inside the intensity. The problem is that when we're being farmed for our activation, the cost of that harvest is our nuance. The mind becomes practiced at reaction and less practiced at reflection. We become fluent in taking sides and less fluent in building understanding. I want to pause on that word, certainty. We usually talk about certainty as if it's the end result of a long, rigorous process of gathering facts and weighing evidence. But in a high-threat state, certainty functions as a form of emotional regulation. When your system is overloaded, a clear conclusion, any clear conclusion, reduces the internal vibration. Doubt is expensive. Complexity it's physically painful. So we grab onto a truth, quote, not because it's accurate, but because it lets our nervous system stop screaming. From the inside, that feeling of relief feels exactly like insight, but it isn't. It's just the sound of a door slamming shut to keep the wind out. This is also why emotionally intense experiences so often leave us feeling morally certain, but strangely inarticulate. We know what side we're on, but we can't quite explain how we got there. Let's look at how this plays out in our entertainment, because this is where many of us go to unwind, not realizing we're actually winding ourselves tighter. Think about the difference between reading a violent scene in a novel versus watching that same scene on a 4K screen. When you read, you are a co-creator of the experience. Your imagination provides the imagery. And most importantly, you control the pace. You can pause at the end of a sentence. You can look away. You have what we call psychological distance. Your nervous system is involved, but you're still the one driving the car. Now, contrast that with modern cinema or high-intensity television. Rapid-fire cuts every 2 seconds, sub-bass frequencies specifically engineered to spike your heart rate and trigger your amygdala. Extreme close-ups that eliminate any sense of personal space. The escalation never lets up. In this environment, your body is literally pulled inside the experience. You aren't watching the movie. Your nervous system is surviving it. People come out of these experiences saying they were profoundly moved, but more often than not, they were just profoundly activated. The system was fully engaged, but there was no spaciousness left for the soul to move or for the mind to interpret. And the truth is, some of us simply have a nervous system that can ride higher waves without capsizing, while others get flooded more quickly. Now, that isn't a moral verdict, it's just a reality of our current load, the total sum of stress we were already carrying before we ever sat down in that theater. We see this same pattern in music, but with even more stealth. Music is the ultimate bypass. It goes straight to the limbic system without asking for permission. It doesn't argue, it just moves in and rearranges the furniture of your mood. A beautiful, melancholic piece of music can evoke a deep sense of sadness while still leaving you enough room to reflect on why you feel sad. That's integration. That's where healing happens. It's the difference between listening to a song and quietly realizing something about your own grief versus being so swept away that the feeling replaces any insight at all. But much of our media culture today refuses that lower threat register. We've become addicted to immersion. Silence is now treated by producers as a failure of engagement. Subtlety is seen as boredom. We're being trained, like Pavlov's dogs, to expect constant activation without a recovery period. The result isn't that we're thinking more deeply about the world, it's that we're leaving these experiences emotionally saturated and cognitively brittle. We are full of vibes and takes, but we're losing our ability to hold a coherent, durable understanding of anything complex. And this exhaustion doesn't just stay in the movie theater. It follows us into the grocery store, into the office, and onto the highway. We're living in a world of micro threats that we almost never name, but our bodies are tallying them up every hour. Think about the driver who tailgates you on the way to work. Your jaw tightens, your shoulders move towards your ears. In that moment, your brain has entered a threat register. You aren't thinking about the complexities of urban planning or wondering if that driver's rushing to the hospital. You are oriented toward an immediate threat. Now consider all the small social slights that happen throughout a typical day. A customer doesn't thank you when you hold the door. A colleague walks past you in the hallway without making eye contact. A neighbor ignores your good morning. Now, your conscious mind might tell you, it's no big deal, don't be sensitive. But your body registers these as tiny hits to your social safety. They are micro threats to your belonging. Individually, they seem trivial. Accumulated across a day, they quietly drain the system the way 100 browser tabs drain a laptop battery. And they place a real, measurable load on your regulatory system. This is where we often fail one another in our judgments. We see someone who is curt or withdrawn or who doesn't offer a friendly greeting, and we immediately label them as rude or entitled or misanthropic. And while sometimes they might be, more often they're not, what you're seeing is a human being who's simply run out of surplus capacity. To acknowledge another human being, to look them in the eye, to smile, to say good morning, actually requires a tiny bit of extra neurological energy. It requires a surplus. When someone is operating at their absolute limit, perhaps they're grieving or worried about money or just overwhelmed by the noise of the world, that surplus is the first thing to go. Their world shrinks to the size of their own chest. They're not being mean, they're just trying to survive the next 10 minutes. If we don't understand this, we add more threat to the environment. We react to their rudeness with our own anger, which narrows their world even further. It's a feedback loop of shrinking minds where no one has the room to be kind because everyone is stuck in a threat register. This leads us to a crucial point. Emotional threat is relational, not personal. Another way to describe this is through a concept that shows up often in trauma-informed work, even though it applies to everyday life as much as it applies to trauma. It's the idea of a window of tolerance. You see, each person has a range, a window, where they can feel emotion and still think, where they can experience stress and still remain relational, where they can be challenged and still stay curious. Inside that window, the nervous system is activated enough to engage, but not so activated that it becomes hijacked. Above the window is hyperarousal. That's fight or flight. That's the clenched jaw, the narrowed attention, the impulse to attack, flee, or dominate the situation so it stops feeling uncertain. Now, below that window is hypoarousal. That's shutdown. That's numbness, detachment, blankness, the feeling of being present physically but absent internally. Both states are protective. Both states are understandable. Neither state is ideal for learning, intimacy, or coherent judgment. What changes from day to day is not your worth and not your intelligence, but where your window is sitting. When you are rested, supported, and resourced, the window is wider. You can tolerate more. You can hold more. But when you're depleted, overwhelmed, or carrying hidden stress, the window narrows. Suddenly, things that would normally roll off your back start to feel sharp. Think of a power grid in South Florida during a heat wave. On a mild day, the grid handles demand easily. But when everyone has their air conditioning blasting at the same time, the grid doesn't become immoral. It doesn't become weak. It becomes overtaxed. Lights flicker. Systems brown out. Capacity contracts. That is surplus capacity. It's the margin you have for patience, grace, humor, and perspective. So when the system is overdrawn, you can still function, but you'll lose the extras first. You'll lose softness. You'll lose the ability to give someone the benefit of the doubt. You lose the ability to recover quickly from a small insult. You lose the ability to hold someone else's complexity while still carrying your own. This is why a person can be kind all day and then snap at their spouse in the evening. It's not that kindness was fake. It's that the grid finally browned out. And this is exactly what I mean when I say emotional threat is relational, not personal. It isn't a fixed trait. It's not about how tough you are or how sensitive you are in the abstract. It's about the ratio between the intensity of the world and your current capacity to integrate it. The same person who's brilliant, compassionate, and open-minded on a quiet Tuesday might be reactive, narrow-minded, and aggressive on a high-stress Wednesday. Their load has changed, and therefore their brain has changed. When we are under that high load, certainty becomes our primary drug of choice. It stabilizes the rocking boat of the psyche. This is why you see so many people today on social media and political rallies and religious spaces who are incredibly righteous and resolved, yet they struggle to explain their reasoning beyond just shouting a slogan or repeating a talking point. They feel like they know with every fiber of their being. But the truth is, they don't actually know. They're just using a belief as a neurological weighted blanket to calm their racing hearts. They have replaced clarity with conviction because conviction feels better when you're scared. And to be clear, this isn't stupidity or bad faith. It's a nervous system doing the best it can with the resources it has left. The real danger of the modern age is that we are starting to crave this activation. We've been conditioned to associate being upset with being right. We begin to distrust any conversation that is calm. We think to ourselves, if I'm not screaming, I must not care enough. Nuance starts to feel like a trap or a sign of weakness. Reflection feels like a luxury we can't afford. But I want to be very clear about what I am and am not advocating for here. I'm not asking you to feel less. I'm not suggesting we should all become cold, detached stoics who ignore the suffering of the world. I'm a psychologist. I believe emotion is the very color of our lives. It's the fuel of our values. It tells us what we care about. But, and this is the but that the culture hates, emotion only becomes usable when it doesn't overwhelm the space required to think about it. Low-threat emotional registers, the quiet moments, the slow-paced books, the long walks in nature, the calm debates with people we disagree with. These don't suppress our feelings. They make our feelings interpretable. They allow you to hold an emotion in the palm of your hand and look at it rather than being swallowed whole by it. They allow emotion to inform your thoughts rather than hijack them. This is where I want to offer what I'll call a professor's note, because part of what has quietly disappeared in modern life is the skill of co-creating meaning. Reading a book is not passive. It looks passive from the outside, but psychologically it's a collaboration. You're not just receiving information, you're actively building images, pacing your attention, noticing your own reactions, and deciding what to do with them. A novel asks you to participate. It asks you to bring your own inner world into contact with another person's mind. That's not consumption, that's relationship. Video is different. Video can be art and video can be moving, but it often places the nervous system in a more passive position. The pacing is decided for you. The imagery is delivered at you. The music tells your body what to do. The cuts decide when your attention shifts. You are carried whether you want to be or not. That difference matters because low threat does not mean boring. Low threat means spacious. It means there is room for your own mind to stay online while you engage with the material. It means you can metabolize what you're encountering instead of just surviving it. There's also a physical ritual component to this we tend to underestimate. Holding a book, sitting with a lamp, taking a breath before you turn the page. These small rituals are not aesthetic flourishes. They're physiological cues. They tell the nervous system that it's safe enough to stay open. They slow the heart rate to meet the material. This is why people who love classic literature often describe it as settling, even when the content is dark. Faulkner can be bleak, but the pacing invites reflection. Lewis can be morally serious, but the tone gives you room. The experience is not engineered to keep you activated. It's engineered to keep you present. And that's the invitation I'm making here. Move from being a consumer of intensity to being a collaborator with meaning, not by withdrawing from life, but by choosing environments where your nervous system is allowed to stay spacious enough to actually think. As we move toward the end of our time today, I want to invite you to audit your own emotional threat diet. Look at the media you consume, the people you follow, and the environments you put yourself in. Are you consistently choosing environments that demand you to be certain? Or are you seeking out environments that allow you to be clear? When our educational systems, our news cycles, and our entertainment industries consistently crank up the emotional threat to keep us engaged, they are effectively making us less capable of understanding the very problems they're highlighting. They're blowing out our neurological fuses in the name of awareness. The question we should be asking ourselves isn't, is this video engaging or is this post impactful? The question must be, does this environment create the emotional conditions that support the kind of deep, integrative thinking I actually want to do? Because the truth is, meaning doesn't arrive through force. You cannot hammer an insight into a mind that is in survival mode. Meaning emerges through integration, and integration, above all else, requires room. It requires a lower heart rate. It requires the safety to be not sure yet. It requires the grace to let a thought sit and breathe before we turn it into a weapon or a wall. So my challenge to you this week is to intentionally protect your surplus capacity. Turn down the volume, slow down the cuts. Give yourself the gift of a low threat register. Because when that space is preserved, your heart and your head are no longer opponents fighting for control of the wheel. They finally become what they're always meant to be, collaborators in the search for what's true. Meaning isn't found in the intensity of the storm. It's found in the charity that comes when the storm finally allows you to see the horizon. Take some time to find your horizon this week. And remember, if you're feeling too much to think, you're not failing, you're just full. And the only way to make room is to step back. You don't need to withdraw from the world to do this. You just need to notice when intensity has crossed the line from informing you or entertaining you to overwhelming you, and give yourself permission to step back. Thank you for listening.
That wraps up this episode of The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr. Each conversation is a step toward greater understanding of ourselves, each other, and the forces that shape human behavior. Listeners are invited to continue the conversation by sharing their thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions at profrjstarr@outlook.com. Every message helps shape future episodes, ensuring the discussions remain relevant, thought-provoking, and meaningful. For those who find value in these explorations, subscribing and leaving a review is a great way to support the podcast and bring these insights to a wider audience. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring the psychology of us.